You're not broken, you're not lazy, and you're not weak. If you've been feeling drained for no clear reason, if joy feels distant, or if you've started to lose connection with yourself, chances are your dopamine is running low. And no, that's not just a buzzword. It's the quiet force behind your motivation, your focus, your energy, even your sense of meaning. In today's world, where we're expected to move faster, do more, and never pause, we've unknowingly built lives that deplete dopamine instead of restoring it. But here's the good news. You don't need pills. You don't need to change your entire life overnight. You just need the right daily rhythm. Simple, natural, powerful shifts that help your mind find its way back to clarity, purpose, and emotional strength. In this video, I'll walk you through 9 practical, science-backed ways to boost dopamine naturally and improve your mental and emotional well-being. These aren't hacks. They're reminders of what your mind actually needs to heal and come alive again. If something in you feels quietly fading, let this be your wake-up call. Make sure to subscribe for more content that helps you reconnect with yourself, and drop a comment below. What part of your inner life are you most ready to rebuild today? 1. Reclaim your energy through movement, even if it's just a walk. One quiet afternoon, I watched my neighbor, a man in his 60s, walking slowly along the sidewalk. No headphones, no distractions, just the sound of his footsteps meeting the pavement. Curious, I asked him why he walks every day. He smiled and said, "Because my mind feels lighter after every lap." There was no mention of burning calories or hitting step goals. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply moving to feel alive again. That single sentence stuck with me, because what he was doing, in the most natural, unforced way, was gently resetting his brain's chemistry. He was rebuilding dopamine, the silent fuel behind motivation, joy, and emotional clarity. Movement doesn't need to be dramatic to be powerful. You don't need a yoga mat, a gym membership, or a smart watch to justify your effort. You just need to begin. A slow walk around the block, a few deep stretches between meetings, even standing up and rolling your shoulders. All of these send signals to your nervous system. I am here, I am moving, I am alive. In those small, seemingly ordinary actions, dopamine begins to stir again. Especially when your mind feels foggy or your body feels heavy, that is not the time to stay frozen. That is the very moment when movement becomes medicine. And yet, when life gets overwhelming, movement is often the first thing we abandon. We sit, we scroll, we shrink. We convince ourselves we need more time, more energy, more motivation. But in truth, dopamine doesn't wait for perfection. It responds to rhythm, to breath, to any motion that reminds your system you are not stuck. Stoic philosophy understood this long before neuroscience confirmed it. Cleanthes, one of the early Stoic thinkers, worked as a manual laborer by night and studied by day. Not because he had no other choice, but because he believed that physical exertion sharpened mental clarity. He hauled water to keep his thoughts clean. He moved his body to keep his soul aligned. His discipline wasn't rooted in vanity, but in inner stillness, the kind that arises not from still bodies, but from steady minds. In our modern lives, we've separated mind and body so drastically that we forget. Mental energy is often born through physical momentum. Even science echoes this truth. Gentle movement increases dopamine production, balances serotonin, and enhances your ability to respond calmly rather than react impulsively. It changes how you experience stress, not by erasing it, but by giving you the capacity to face it without crumbling. The next time you feel unmotivated or mentally stuck, don't ask what you can think your way through. Ask how you can move your way forward, even barefoot across your living room. Even to the mailbox and back. It doesn't have to be perfect. It only has to begin. Because motion signals life. And life, when gently reawakened, brings dopamine back into flow. 2. Nourish your brain, not just your cravings. A close friend of mine used to joke, "I'm not stressed. I'm just hugging my 3rd bag of chips today." We laughed. It was lighthearted. But later, she admitted that the more she ate sweets when she felt overwhelmed, the more exhausted, irritable, and sleepless she became. It's a cycle many of us fall into without realizing it. When dopamine levels drop, we don't always notice the chemistry changing. What we do notice is an urge, subtle but strong, to reach for comfort food. not because we're hungry, but because we're empty. The problem is, most of the foods we turn to during emotional lows don't replenish our minds. They give us a quick hit, a brief sense of relief, then leave our nervous systems more scrambled than before. Sugary snacks, fried comfort food, or highly processed bites trick our brain with a fleeting spike in pleasure, only to crash our focus, energy, and motivation shortly after. If you've ever felt more anxious or sluggish after a binge, it's not just in your head, it's in your chemistry. Dopamine, the very molecule that drives your motivation, clarity, and emotional stability, is deeply affected by what you feed yourself. While emotional cravings scream for sugar, your brain is quietly begging for building blocks. Things like protein, healthy fats, and foods rich in amino acids like tyrosine, which directly support dopamine production. These aren't trendy buzzwords. They are the raw materials your brain needs to function clearly. Instead of asking, "What should I eat to lose weight?" ask, "What should I eat to think clearly and feel emotionally grounded?" That's a very different conversation, one rooted in mental clarity, not just physical appearance. The Stoics, of course, didn't talk about dopamine or amino acids, but they understood something timeless. Seneca once wrote, "Drunkenness is voluntary madness," and though he spoke of alcohol, the wisdom applies to anything that clouds the mind. Emotional eating, in excess and without awareness, can become its own form of madness. It numbs discomfort, not by resolving it, but by pushing it down further. And in doing so, it separates us from the discipline of conscious living, the very virtue the Stoics held sacred. Choosing real nourishment is not about guilt or restriction. It's about self-respect. It's about feeding the brain, not just the craving. A meal built with care, a protein-packed breakfast, a glass of water before your phone, isn't just physical fuel. It's a message to your nervous system. I'm here, I'm steady, I'm in charge. And that message, repeated daily, changes everything. So the next time you're standing in front of the fridge late at night, overwhelmed by emotion, pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, am I hungry or am I hurting? Because what you choose in that moment doesn't just fill your stomach, it rewires your mind. 3. Sleep isn't laziness, it's mental maintenance. I used to stay up late every night trying to finish just one more thing, thinking I was being productive, disciplined, and driven. It felt like I was doing the right thing, sacrificing rest in exchange for progress. But then, one day, I forgot an important appointment with my mother. Not because I didn't care, not because I was lazy, but because my brain had lost the dopamine it needed to even remember what mattered. That was the moment I realized sleep isn't something we squeeze in when life allows. It's the quiet, invisible engine behind everything we hope to be the next day. Dopamine isn't just built by willpower or productivity, it's restored in rest. While we sleep, the brain cleanses out toxins, resets our emotional wiring, and regulates the chemical balance that makes clarity, motivation, and joy even possible. A single night of poor sleep can make you more irritable, more forgetful, and more likely to spiral. Not because you lack discipline, but because your mental maintenance was interrupted. Over time, chronic sleep deprivation lowers dopamine receptor sensitivity, which means even the things that used to inspire you stop feeling good. Your favorite music, your goals, your relationships, they all start to feel flat. You're not broken, you're just chemically depleted. And no amount of caffeine can replace what deep rest provides. Yet sleep is often the first thing we cut when life gets busy. We convince ourselves that pushing through is noble, but in reality, we're stealing from tomorrow, from our ability to think clearly, stay calm, and feel alive. The cost of sleep deprivation isn't just fatigue, it's emotional instability, mental fog, and the slow erosion of your inner resilience. You don't just lose energy. You lose access to the parts of yourself that make life feel meaningful. The Stoics didn't talk about REM cycles or neurochemistry, but Marcus Aurelius knew this. In order to wake and do the work of a human being, you must allow yourself proper rest. Sleep isn't avoidance, it's preparation. It's the boundary between scattered chaos and focused action. Without it, Stoic principles like emotional discipline and clarity of thought become empty ideals, impossible to live out in a burned-out body. So if you've been treating sleep as optional, something to earn after the day is done, it's time to rethink. Protect your nights. Guard the transition from doing to being. Dim the lights, quiet the noise, and treat your rest like the sacred ritual it truly is. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. Because your nervous system isn't a machine. And because dopamine, the quiet force behind your focus, your joy, your mental stability, needs the night to do its work. Sleep isn't surrender. It's a signal that says, I'm not just surviving, I'm rebuilding. 4. Stillness is a forgotten power. I once visited an older aunt who lived alone. Her house was quiet, no TV humming in the background, no music filling the space, just the subtle ticking of a clock and the occasional breeze brushing through an open window. I asked her if it ever felt lonely in all that silence. She smiled gently and said, "Can you hear it? That's my mind, finally breathing." That moment stayed with me because it made something clear. Stillness isn't emptiness. It's where the noise finally stops long enough for the truth to return. In today's hyper-connected world, stillness is almost taboo. We fill every spare moment with stimulation, scrolling through headlines, checking messages, playing podcasts in the background while doing chores. Silence feels uncomfortable, like we're doing something wrong if we're not consuming, reacting, or producing. But the paradox is this: dopamine, the very chemical that drives focus, motivation, and emotional balance, doesn't always need stimulation to thrive. Sometimes what it needs most is the absence of it. In quiet, your nervous system gets to reset. Your emotions begin to settle. The thoughts that have been shoved aside in all the busyness start to surface, not to overwhelm you, but to be heard and released. When you allow yourself just 5 minutes of intentional silence, no phone, no task, no performance, something powerful happens. You start observing your thoughts instead of becoming them. You create space between what you feel and how you respond. That space is where emotional clarity lives. It's also where dopamine can re-regulate itself. In this space, you're not numbing, escaping, or pretending. You're simply being. And in that state, your brain no longer has to burn energy managing 1,000 inputs. It can finally return to baseline. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." He wasn't being poetic. He was laying out a practical strategy for mental resilience. Stoicism was never about suppressing feelings. It was about creating the kind of inner stillness where feelings could be examined without control. And from that space, wisdom could rise. Stillness is not passive. It's an active practice of returning. Returning to your breath, your presence, your center. It doesn't require a meditation cushion or a mountaintop. It can be a cup of tea alone in the morning, a walk without earbuds, or a few deep breaths in your parked car. What matters is the intention. Because when you choose stillness, especially in a world that thrives on distraction, you reclaim your mind. You give yourself permission to pause without apology. And in doing so, you invite dopamine to return on its own terms. Not through intensity, but through alignment. In the silence, the body softens, the heart speaks, and the mind at last begins to feel alive again. 5. Celebrate the small wins. That's how motivation is built. One afternoon, my daughter ran up to me beaming with pride and shouted, "Dad, I remembered to bring my jacket home today." It was such a small thing, something easy to overlook. But in her eyes, I saw something deeper. Belief. A quiet, growing trust in her ability to keep her word. That one moment reminded me, motivation doesn't come from grand achievements. It's built through the repetition of small, honest victories. And more importantly, it's reinforced when we pause long enough to recognize them. Dopamine doesn't wait for you to win big. It responds to momentum. It's triggered every time your brain senses progress, no matter how minor. Drinking a glass of water when you wake up. Choosing to breathe instead of snapping when frustrated. Writing a few lines in your journal, even when you're tired. These actions might seem insignificant, but each one tells your nervous system, "I'm showing up." That message, consistent and quiet, is what begins to rewire your brain for sustainable motivation. When you dismiss your progress because it's not perfect or flashy, you deny yourself the very chemistry that would keep you going. The result? Burnout. A sense of failure, not because you didn't move forward, but because you refused to see that you did. In a world obsessed with outcomes, we often forget that motivation doesn't appear out of thin air. It's built, moment by moment, choice by choice. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, even a small one, you're creating a pattern. You're teaching your brain to associate effort with reward. And the more that happens, the more your dopamine system learns to function in healthy, reliable cycles. You no longer have to rely on adrenaline or pressure. You begin to move from a place of inner alignment, a place where forward motion feels natural, not forced. The Stoics understood this long before we had names for neurotransmitters. Epictetus once said, "First say to yourself what you would be, then do what you have to do." This wasn't a call to perfection. It was a call to direction, to clarity. Once you know what kind of person you want to become, each small action becomes part of that identity. Not symbolic, but real. Not someday, but now. So if you're waiting for a breakthrough, stop. Start tracking your small wins. Not for social media, not for applause, but for your own emotional rhythm. Keep a quiet list. Smile when you notice you stayed calm today. Nod to yourself when you followed through on something you said. Those are not trivial details. They're dopamine rituals. They're the architecture of long-term self-respect. Because the person who learns to celebrate the climb, even one step at a time, will never run out of motivation. Not because the path is easy, but because they've learned to draw strength from the walk itself. 6. Let music shift your mood when words can't ting. One gray morning, I stopped by a friend's house. He had just lost someone close to him. There weren't many words exchanged. None were needed. We sat quietly until he reached over and played a soft jazz tune. As the music filled the room, something shifted. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. But his eyes softened. His body unclenched. I realized then that music was holding space for what his words couldn't carry. It was helping him process pain safely, without pressure. And that's the hidden magic of music. It reaches parts of us that language can't touch. Dopamine isn't only triggered by action, it responds deeply to sound. Not just background noise, not just what's popular or algorithm-fed, but music you choose with intention. A melody that resonates with your inner state can awaken something long buried. A memory, a clarity, a breath. Music works as a mirror for the soul. Uplifting rhythms can raise your energy when the world feels heavy. Slow, tender songs can invite you to feel emotions you've pushed away. And instrumental music? Sometimes that's the exact stillness your overworked mind has been craving. A space without expectation, where your nervous system can reset. This isn't accidental. Studies have shown that listening to music you love activates your brain's reward system, releasing dopamine in areas responsible for pleasure and focus. That's why a song from your childhood can lift your spirits instantly, or why a specific chord progression can move you to tears without warning. It's not about logic, it's about chemistry, memory, emotion, all converging in the same moment. And when you're mentally or emotionally drained, this shift in inner frequency can mean everything. It doesn't require a therapist or a deep conversation. It just asks you to listen, openly and honestly. The Stoics didn't speak much of music, but they understood the principle beneath it. At the core of Stoicism is the ability to align your inner world with what brings clarity and peace, to strengthen what supports you, and let go of what clouds you. In that sense, music becomes a modern expression of a timeless practice. It is a tool not just for entertainment, but for emotional grounding, for realignment, for remembering what matters when words no longer serve. So the next time you feel stuck, anxious, or numb, resist the urge to distract yourself with random noise. Instead, pause. Choose one song that speaks to the version of you you're trying to return to. Let it play without interruption. Close your eyes. Let your breath follow the rhythm. Feel where it lands, in your chest, in your memory, in your resistance. Don't analyze, just allow. Because sometimes your nervous system doesn't need you to talk your way out of a feeling. It just needs you to feel it fully, with music as the bridge back to yourself. And that too is dopamine, not from stimulation, but from connection. 7. Choose relationships that recharge you, not drain you. A woman I know used to feel completely drained after her weekly catch-ups with a group of old friends. At first, she assumed it was social fatigue or a personal flaw. Maybe she just wasn't as fun anymore. But over time, she realized it wasn't her. It was the room. These were people who masked criticism as humor, who competed instead of listening, who measured her life against their own and made her feel smaller for not measuring up. What she thought was a lack of energy was actually a lack of alignment. Her dopamine was being depleted, not restored. We often think of motivation and clarity as internal traits, but the truth is, your emotional state is deeply influenced by the people you allow close. Dopamine doesn't just rise with action, it rises in connection. When you're around someone who truly sees you, who listens without needing to fix, who celebrates you without conditions, your nervous system responds. You relax, your shoulders drop, you feel safe, not in the absence of conflict, but in the presence of honesty. This emotional safety is what fuels motivation, focus, and emotional resilience. You don't need a room full of people, you just need one or two who help you return to yourself. On the other hand, when you spend time with people who judge, belittle, or subtly undermine you, your brain flips into survival mode. Even if the words are polite, the energy is draining. Your dopamine production slows, your mood dips, and you leave feeling scattered, uncertain, and emotionally tight. And often, you blame yourself for being sensitive, introverted, or tired. But it's not you, it's biology. And the more you override those signals, the more disconnected you become from what your body is trying to tell you. This relationship is not safe for your nervous system. The Stoics didn't ignore the power of connection. Seneca wrote, "To be understood is one of friendship's greatest gifts." In Stoic thinking, a true friend is not someone who flatters, but someone who helps sharpen your character, gently and steadily, through presence and truth. They hold a mirror to your potential, not your wounds. They don't demand that you perform. They remind you of who you are when you're not performing. So ask yourself, after each interaction, do I feel clearer or more confused? Do I feel more grounded, or do I start doubting myself? That feeling in your chest, that heaviness or lightness, that's dopamine talking. Pay attention. Protect the energy that fuels your inner stability. And just as important, be that person for others. Be the kind of friend who listens without judgment, who lifts without force, who sees without needing to correct. Because the relationships that restore you are never about noise. They're about quiet strength, the kind that makes you feel more like yourself the longer you sit in their presence. And that is not a luxury. That is emotional medicine. 8. Step into the sun. It's the simplest mood booster. Every morning, I step onto my balcony with a warm cup of coffee. I don't bring my phone, I don't play music, I just stand there and let the sun meet my skin. One day, a new neighbor asked me, "What are you doing out here so early?" I smiled and said, "Nothing really, I just let the sun do its job." He laughed, but I meant it. Because over time, I've learned that this simple act, stepping into morning light, is one of the most powerful and overlooked ways to restore dopamine and emotional balance without doing anything dramatic. Sunlight, especially in the first hours of the day, sends a direct signal to the brain. Wake up, reset, realign. It stimulates dopamine production in regions tied to motivation, attention, and energy. It also regulates your circadian rhythm, which means better sleep, steadier mood, and more clarity throughout the day. And yet, most of us spend our best hours under artificial light, behind closed curtains or glued to glowing screens. We look for energy in caffeine and stimulation, forgetting that we are biological beings built to respond to the natural world. Your nervous system isn't indifferent to sunlight. It's designed to be activated by it. You don't need to hike a mountain or take a nature retreat to access this. Just open the window. Step outside for 5 minutes without a purpose. Let your skin feel the breeze, even if it's cold. Let your eyes without sunglasses absorb the sky. This small daily exposure recalibrates more than your internal clock. It grounds you in the present and reminds your body it's part of a rhythm greater than any deadline or screen. And the benefits don't come through intensity, they come through consistency. A few minutes each morning is enough to begin shifting your emotional chemistry. The Stoics knew this long before science confirmed it. Marcus Aurelius often sought clarity beneath the sky. To the Stoics, nature wasn't a luxury or an escape, it was a mirror, a place where life made sense again. When overwhelmed by confusion, they returned to the order and simplicity of the natural world. And sunlight, that most basic and ancient form of light, became part of their alignment. So if you've been feeling dull, foggy, or disconnected, don't rush to fix it with more input. Instead, start with light. Before you check your phone, before you pour your second coffee, step outside. Even for a moment, let the sun touch your face and do what it has done for thousands of years. Reset you. Not with noise, but with presence. Because sometimes the best way to brighten your mind isn't to add more. It's to step back into something your body has never stopped craving. Real light, real air, real clarity. And in that return, dopamine quietly begins to flow again. 9. Do what awakens you, not just what's expected. There is a kind of joy that doesn't need an audience. It doesn't demand results, doesn't prove a point, and doesn't follow a checklist. It simply exists. Quiet, personal, often forgotten. And yet, it is this quiet joy that carries the deepest power to reset your mind and restore your emotional well-being. Dopamine doesn't only respond to discipline or duty. It responds to meaning. It responds to that subtle sense of aliveness that comes when you're fully engaged in something that feels like yours. Not something you're doing to meet a deadline or please others, but something that calls to you without asking for justification. In a world driven by metrics and performance, it's easy to lose touch with that kind of engagement. You start to believe your worth lies in how productive you are, how visible your efforts appear, and how many outcomes you can deliver. But over time, living only in response to what's expected slowly dulls your spirit. The days blend, the mind flattens. You begin to confuse being busy with being alive. And dopamine, the signal of direction, joy, and reward, begins to disappear. Not because you're doing too little, but because you're doing too much of what doesn't speak to your core. To reverse that erosion, you don't need a new career, a dramatic shift, or the perfect plan. You just need to carve out space, even a small one, for the things that make you forget the clock. That brings stillness to your thoughts and motion to your hands. That reminds you what it feels like to create, not to be seen, but to feel. This kind of activity might look trivial from the outside, but neurologically, it's profound. It creates flow, reduces stress, enhances focus, and most importantly, reignites healthy dopamine cycles. It tells your brain, this moment matters. Not because it's profitable or productive, but because it's real. The Stoics believed deeply in alignment, not with expectations, but with nature and with one's truest self. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts," which means that what you repeatedly do and how you feel while doing it literally shapes your inner landscape. When your thoughts are always tied to duty, your spirit begins to carry the weight of obligation. But when they're occasionally lit by wonder, curiosity, and play, your soul takes on the color of vitality. Stoicism doesn't reject joy. It demands that joy be rooted in authenticity, not escape. And it urges you to live not by accident, but by intention. So if you've been feeling emotionally flat, uninspired, or chronically tired, ask yourself, when was the last time I did something simply because it stirred something in me? Because true energy, the kind that lasts, doesn't come from chasing goals. It comes from returning to the things that wake you up from within and allowing them, quietly and consistently, to color your life again. You don't need a dramatic life overhaul to feel better. Often the shift begins with the smallest decisions. Stepping into sunlight, choosing a meal that nourishes your brain, taking 5 minutes of stillness before the day rushes in. These 9 practices aren't just healthy habits. They are powerful, natural ways to reset your dopamine, boost your energy, and reconnect with your emotional well-being. In a world that constantly demands more, you don't have to push harder. You can move smarter. You can realign with what truly makes you feel alive, not through pressure, but through presence. The truth is, dopamine isn't a reward for being perfect. It's a signal that you're living in alignment with movement, with meaning, with intention. So give yourself that chance. Choose consistency over intensity. Choose what recharges you over what drains you. And most of all, choose to honor the version of you that's ready to feel clear, grounded, and emotionally strong again. If something in this video resonated with you, I invite you to share your story in the comments below. What simple shift are you ready to make today? Your voice might be the encouragement someone else needs to begin.